Section 3 of Living on Half a Dime a Day. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sue Anderson. Living on Half a Dime a Day by Sarah Elizabeth Harper Monmouth. Section 3. But as to the half a dime a day, that is, the providing of food for that sum, it did not take that every day, by any means. I saved enough from this allotment to supply divers little necessary articles, a bunch of matches, spool of thread, paper of needles, even a gallon of oil now and then. Almost the year round I used a lamp stove for cooking purposes. It was cheaper than fuel and more convenient. Kerosene in summer could be bought very low, and then I would get enough to last through cool weather. Sometimes I would go through a whole week on 2 baker's loaves, 16 cents, a tablespoon of ginger and a gill of molasses, not more than 23 cents, thus saving 12 out of the 35 allotted for the week's expenses. But this was when my health was feeble and I confined to couch almost altogether. I was in this state more than a year. I made large use of cornmeal, of course, it being cheap and nutritious. 1/4 pound of meal, 1 cent. 1/4 pound of dried beans, 1½ cents. 2 cents worth of salt pork. 4½ cents in all would support me a day and a half very well. This was my usual fare 3 days out of 7. 3 cents worth of barley, boiled with 2 cents worth of butcher's trimmings, and 3 cents worth of potatoes would make wholesome, nourishing food for 2 days and go a long way toward supporting existence. I have heard it said a German can live on what a Yankee would throw away, and a Jew could live on what a German would throw away, and a Chinaman could live on what a Jew would throw away. I almost thought I could bear off the palm from the whole of them and live on what a Chinaman would throw away, if he was a clean one. I made a considerable use of rice and salted fish. In cool weather a pound of oatmeal cooked on Monday would serve for a dessert through the week. Sometimes I had a gift of milk, and then I feasted like an epicure. I usually allotted a small cup of molasses as sauce and relish to a pound of oatmeal. Now and then I had some kind of a vegetable, as a beet or a turnip, and from time to time bought a few cents worth of butcher's scraps, more to season food than to be food. When eggs were cheap I made use of them. I did not buy when they were more than 10 cents a dozen. I never could make these go as far as I had heard of one housewife doing, who would cook 1 for a family of 5, and after all had eaten freely there would still be some left. Perhaps this lady bought her ovas of an ostrich or a moa bird. Mine were only barn-door biddies' eggs, and I was apt to want 2 for breakfast. Once a month I indulged in a baking of gingerbread, or got a pound of lard and fried an eating of doughnuts, about 6, 1 at a time, in a tin cup over my oil stove. I always enjoyed the frying of the doughnuts, and looked forward to it with a zest of anticipation. They generally came up plump and round, and quite filled the little cup of boiling lard. I picked them out with a fork, and invariably ate the first one while the second was cooking. After that I let them congregate on a plate, and watched their numbers increase to 5, 6, 7, never more than that. These and the gingerbread were usually mixed with water and no shortening, but if eaten warm or pretty soon after the cooking, very good as I considered. They were my occasional luxuries. I would think, as I tended my lonely doughnut in the small cup of fat, of the great panfuls of brown beauties I had cooked in former years, and thought very lightly of them, not ungrateful, but regarding a full supply of all good things for the stomach as a matter of course, never dreaming a time would come when I must choose between lower and higher food, a table spread for the body, or a table spread for the mind, or of lessening the supplies of one for the sake of furnishing out the other. Once, perhaps, I should not have done thus. Not a few times have I been told by those who deemed themselves much wiser than I, that I was starving myself, that it was wicked not to take care of one's body. Nobody could live without good food. But my food was good, or I was greatly mistaken, for I ate it, devoured it, I might say, with the eager relish of a growing child. It lacked in variety, perhaps. It was not rich. It was fairly cooked and regularly taken, and of a kind to bring the best returns in health and strength. Of course, I had times of longing for the flesh-pots of Egypt. On Saturdays I would think of the great bakings going on in the houses round me, and see in fancy the array of fresh bread loaves, pies, and sweet cakes on the pantry shelves. Almost seemed to inhale the odors of good cooking, and contrast this spectacle with my empty old cupboard, empty now and evermore, or with just a pint pot of oatmeal in a corner, and very likely my mouth would water till I buried myself in some book which exalted the value of the soul, and made contemptible the course of such as live supremely for the gratifications of the present life. Persons of this stamp would assert, directly or indirectly, the superiority of their method of living, and declare it the most quixotic, foolish, wicked thing to stint oneself in food and clothes. Folks must live. Why must they live? What must they live for? To eat and wear clothes? Allow me to say in all candor and reverence, I should rather die than thus exist. Of course, a person cannot live without food and raiment, but that these should be the chief concern, the object and end of existence, as it were, is pitiful and humiliating among a people who have enjoyed the benefits of civilization, and have some degree of education and intelligence. A sudden and complete change of circumstances compelled me to choose which I would serve, and which should serve me, mind or matter. I don't know as I hesitated at all. Certain things I knew I must have, certain others it would be possible to do without. I declared for mind. I felt like one cut loose from time, clinging to eternity. This life, this perishable body, must soon go. The little I could still manage to do must be for the immortal part. There was a certain tyranny of opinion to endure, afflictive enough, and on which I grew thinner than on dried beans and oatmeal. The best I could do was to hold myself aloof from it. Less than ever now could I allow others to lay down the law for me to follow. Stern necessity was compelling to a more decided and pronounced individuality than ever before. I make a brief digression to say I have been waiting a lifetime to canonize any who would afford me opportunity, but the first name is yet to be enrolled in my calendar of saints. It is amazing. I don't remember that I ever took the liberty to call any person to account as to their particular style and method of living, but no one enters my doors without taking me to task, more or less sharply, often flinging stern reproach and condemnation on my unsocial, unnatural, morbid, monstrous way of life. Do not be too much alarmed. I am not quite an ogress or a tigress. I simply live by myself. As if no one ever lived thus before. Why, I know a dozen people who live thus, and are not scoffed at and condemned to death for it, as I am. As if I was to blame for being alone. Was it not hard enough to lose all near friends when comparatively young, and be left thus without being reproached for the aloneness, as it were? The first person who doesn't take exception, arraign, or denounce me on account of my quiet way of life, I wait to canonize. If I were to devour myself with envy of those happily constituted people, who, when near ties are broken, can readily form new ones, it would not help me to have a nature like theirs, and so it could not help my condition, but would rather render it more grievous. There is no loneliness like the loneliness of feelings unreplied to. And there is in this one comfort for odd people, that no creature God has made can seem odd or strange in His sight. He comprehends the full character, and at last the lonesome spirit may unburden itself to Him, with no fear of being misapprehended or misunderstood. And yet, if there might be somebody who would think enough of earth and earthly things to treat them nicely, and yet not be engrossed in them and enslaved by them to the utter neglect and forgetfulness of higher and better things, such a choice sort of somebody it might be safe, pleasant, and helpful to have near. But so many live rudely and grossly, and care for no better way, do not believe there is any better way, and mock at refinement and insult good taste and order. Thus there has always been a tendency to criticism in my case, and when reverses came, people were freer than ever to express views, offer advice, and point out the proper course of action. Let your place or sell it, and buy a snug cottage, or hire your board and have things nice and comfortable as long as you live, said one. And another, I wish I were as sure of being comfortably provided for in old age as you are. Such persons were either ignorant of circumstances, or lacked good sense, or were thoughtless and unfeeling. To let my place, experience told me, would be fraught with loss and annoyances my present state of health could not endure. As to selling it, I loved it better than life, and never understood I could get more than $600 for it. But if I could have got twice that sum and essayed to buy another, little would have been left for my support. My table would not have been much better supplied than at present, and life would not have been life away from the old home. If I had hired my board, the money would have slipped from me almost before I was aware, probably, and left me on public charity. My house might have held a few boarders, if I could have superintended them, but my crippled arm, poor health, and nervous depression would not admit of this. I should have to see it go into dilapidation and decay if life was much prolonged. The roofs leaked now, the windows were rickety, the chimney discharged a mournful brickbat in every driving storm. Out of the wreck of all, if I could garner enough to subsist, save a few dollars for good books, and a few more to help any worse off than myself, and add a mite to benevolent causes, it was all I hoped or expected. Thus far I have done this. I have lived and thrived in a small way on half a dime a day, or rather on $40 a year, all things included. For clothing there has been no outlay of money. Contrivance and a crippled hand has supplied all my garments. As to fuel, I am not accustomed to provide more than 3 cords a year, $9 usually, and manage to saw most of it as I want to use it, save in winter I pick up the wood I burn, dead tree limbs, pine cones, and moss for kindlings. For almost all cooking, as I have said, I use an oil stove. On this I often heat a freestone and wrap myself up so as not to require a fire in my airtight stove till pretty cool weather. The cold snaps in winter are so paralyzing to the partially perished arm I can do no kind of work. So then, when I can earn nothing, I can at least save wood by covering up in bed. I do not exactly, like the mole and dormouse, burrow for the winter. In mild spells I thaw out, and do my best to bring up things that have fallen into arrears during the cold term. I search the drawers and closets in the old house, to see if I may not come upon some material out of which to fashion some small holiday gifts for children and friends who bring me baskets of benefaction at times through the year. I ought to have made mention of these before. End of Section 3.